So, welcome back to another episode of Diaspoda, where at long last we are going to be doing the men's side of the dating crisis discussion. And as is tradition in these earlier podcasts, I have another new guest today, Pete. I want to welcome you to the program. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Matt. I've been looking forward to it. I've been listening since you started, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you
Should
here.
I?
And
Should I? Oh, there's a
yes,
saying. There's a video I saw from before. There you go.
yeah,
That's
we're gonna
funny.
get to that in a bit here. Yeah, and,
Right?
and you sent me this channel, so I've been going through it,
Yeah.
and I have a clip for later on to go through. But I guess we wanted to start
Yeah.
off by saying that you and I, I was reflecting on this in the anticipation of doing this one with you here tonight.
hmm
You and I have been talking about some really interesting and serious issues since like it's over 20 years now.
2000, 2000, I think.
Not that no, 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 not that far. We met in 2003, I know.
It was about then. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Around then.
yeah.
So
So
20
and
years. 20
it's
years
been
and then some. That's right.
yes, yeah. So
Yeah.
so before cell phones became ubiquitous. So actually, I think in the
hmm
place where we met, I knew people, and I think you knew people that had cell phones, and it was like a novelty that they could just kind of pull it out and they're like, "I'm calling for a ride right now." So and how much
hmm
things have changed because of cell phones, the internet technology, and also the cultural stuff as well. And it has obviously had an impact on the topic we're going to cover tonight on the dating crisis. Where again, I don't
Yeah.
think I need to introduce it. We're basically heading for a situation where it's almost like a standoff where on the one hand, a lot of women out there today, single women, are saying, why can't men come to the table, right, and
hmm
be the things that we want them to be, and men are like, women won't be what we need them to be from our side,
hmm
and so we're
Yep.
just going to tap out. And I mean, with AI and robotics, there's already open discussion about men finding companionship just through technology, and
Oof.
I don't think that's a hard thing to imagine because the most of the internet
It's
traffic
not.
right now goes to that. So,
It's
um,
it
yeah,
it's just a natural extension of where dating and male sexuality has kind of gone in the last 20 years without it, right? Before you even get to AI.
yeah, no,
hmm
absolutely. So when we had the ladies on, they did ask. Just full disclosure, I don't usually do this, but they asked for the questions ahead of time to reflect on it. You don't get that benefit,
I,
Pete.
I don't,
So,
I don't want it. I don't
yeah, I
want it.
know.
It's kind of fun to process an idea as long as the audience is forgiving. It's okay to kind of process an idea out loud with a generous audience because uh, you can see where thoughts kind of how they form and in what circumstance they're kind of being addressed. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm excited for that because I don't have to have the questions ahead of time. It'll be fun.
yeah, no, absolutely. So I guess to tee off things today, one question I want to ask you, because this is something that
Yeah.
I think as guys we need to kind of talk about this. As guys who are married, who have been through
Mm.
the fun of dating. I'm not going to do another plug for Christian Cafe because I think you met your wife through that site as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, and it was totally funny because I was listening to your wife's episode with my daughter while driving, um, because that's all you do in rural Alberta, is drive from one place to another. And so I laughed out loud when you mentioned Christian Cafe because I didn't know that, but that's exactly where me and my wife met. Yeah. So you had a question, and I totally interrupted you.
No, it's all good. So we're doing another plug non-plug for Christian
Yeah.
Cafe, I guess today. But I guess the first question I want to ask is, okay, you're a young man, or you put yourself
Mhm.
in the shoes of a young man who's maybe around 25 or the 30 today,
Yeah.
and the landscape is not promising. Let's just put that out there, and I think everyone could
Yeah.
agree on that. And um, he's coming to you for advice, or you're coming to an older man for advice and saying, uh, I'm just thinking of giving up. I mean, I can go make money. I can buy myself a house. I can have the freedom that I don't otherwise have if, in the current dating and marriage world. I'm just going to tap out, right? And what would you say to that young man as far as advice for why that's a bad idea, both in the near and in the long term?
Um, well, I'd say there's a number of reasons why I would say it, and part of it does come from a Christian worldview. I'd say one of the reasons why you don't want to tap out of that early is because you are actually going to, I mean, maybe tap out early is the wrong attitude. I believe it's something. Um, I believe the right person is presented to you when you're prepared for it. Um, but you should be trying to get prepared for it. So it would not be a matter of like tapping out or not doing it, but I would say you should do both. You should be trying to go out, find your vocation, and find your calling, grow in wisdom and capability, um, because if you're 18 and you're just out of school and you have no ability, honestly, you're not going to find the right person in that context. So in some sense, I wouldn't say that. I'd say they should pursue those things, but also pursue those things with a mindset of a more valuable legacy than money and fun and career, because all of those are honestly pretty temporal when it comes to things like starting a family and having children. Um, as a dad, I've got 3 kids, and I the 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 joy. I There's challenge and hardship and all of those things, but I honestly, looking at my friends who don't have kids, and right now the most of my contemporaries do not have kids. Um, I can't help but feel like their lives are becoming at a gradual pace more and more empty. You lose touch with friendships. People get distracted. You can only buy so many toys and so many things. And I have tiny humans who literally want to spend every moment with me. And they're amazing because they are the best qualities of you or the worst qualities of you, depending on what you foster. And so I'm not sure if that's actually a good answer to your question, but I'd say, yeah. So I'd say, one, you should do both, but do pursue your career, figure out your vocation, strengthen yourself in your mind and in your faith and in your capabilities as you're actually trying to pursue the kind of woman you want to marry. Trying to find out who that is. Maybe you haven't met her yet. That's fine. Um, but don't tap out, because it's going to be in that growth that you're going to, first of all, ideally attract the person who would be attracted to those qualities. Um, and try and determine what kind of husband and father you're going to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think, don't worry, your answer, I think, was a very good baseline. I'm gonna probably elaborate a little bit on it, as well, based on, I think, what you're already saying, but just gonna
Hmm.
fill in a few of the details. So, if you're 25, 27, in that age range, who are
Yeah.
the women that you've been, exposed to as far as potential dating, you know,
Oh, terrible choices.
candidates? Well, yeah, I mean, like, let's say, for example, you're a professional, right? You've gone through university, right? All of the girls in your class, and I reflect back on this, and I don't know what you
Hmm.
Pete as well, but like you look at university, the likelihood of finding someone that is like, and the statistics show this too, that is going to lead to a long-term stable happy marriage is actually lower by dating at your like local your university that you're attending, because again, and we can get into this maybe later, but the likelihood of a divorce increases in a marriage the
Yeah.
closer that the income of the wife's income is to the husband's,
Yeah.
right?
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, so already you're kind of putting yourself there. You are obviously dealing with life choices by definition, and a young woman who's going for a 4-year degree, maybe postgraduate work. She's going to want to apply that, more likely than not. There are exceptions, and I know an exception in particular I'm thinking of right now. There's more likely than not she's going to want to apply that in a career, right? And that's going to take away from some of the things that a family is going to need to really thrive. And I know that's not
Hmm.
politically correct. I know that I'm going to be called antiquated for that. That's okay. We are starting to get to the point, I think, where the Overton window has moved enough where not just men, but women are starting to kind of
Hmm.
get in. And this is why you're talking about stuff like, wifiness or
Hmm.
trad wife. Those terms are starting to come into the
Yeah.
vocabulary because people are starting to realize that, like, like you said, and if it's true for men, it's true for women too. If you make your life, and this is true for both sexes, if you make your life all about your career, that's a very baby boomer-ish idea in before, right? Millennials adopted it. Gen Z, I think, is
Yeah.
at least at this point kind of questioning it, but we'll see. The jury's still out on that. But
But what,
yeah.
questioning in questioning it, and they're replacing it with what?
Oh, and we'll
Like
get to
that's the
that.
issue.
Yeah, we're not out
Yeah.
of the woods by any means. I'm not saying Gen
Yeah.
Z has got it all figured out because obviously we're doing this program for Gen Zers in particular
Yeah.
at this point, and maybe anyone who comes afterwards. But at least I think we're actually at the point as a society where, and I think COVID actually helped in this regard, where we're realizing career is not what defines you, and it isn't. For women, who are hearing this, it is not the thing that is going to make you satisfied and I know there's a lot of pressure on women, even women who do choose to, like, want to be, moms at
Hmm.
home, raising their kids, homeschooling, things like that. They still feel that stigma of like, well, you're not really working. It's like, and your wife and my wife both can, speak to the, exactly
Yeah.
the opposite of that. But in addition, for men, the same is true too, and that's why again, this is a dangerous path to go down. This whole, well, I'm just going to stay single, even though I would have otherwise wanted to get married because it's just not a good pool. But there's the education side of things, and then by extension, the workforce. I don't know of anyone personally who's been in a work relationship with someone that they worked with, but it's like even HR knows that's a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
I know one of my former employers. There was a very prominent case that happened, I think, a few years ago. I think it was around the time that I left, but it was pretty high up, where it turned out that someone in the C-suite was dating a lower level direct report, and it wasn't publicly disclosed, and they both ended up getting fired in the end. And it's not a good idea if career is your
Hmm.
goal. It's not a good idea for
Yeah.
that. But again, it's the whole thing of who you are at work. There can be some overlapping consistency, but you're also not seeing that person in all of the challenges that you would see them in a family context, right? So again,
Hmm.
I guess what to kind of summarize, what we're both saying here is broaden your horizons. And to your other point, I'll use this as a segue to bring in the video here. Um, you know, as a guy, this is your opportunity to level up, right? If I
Hmm.
can,
Yeah.
bring in my nerdiness into this,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Um,
right?
like I know I'm sure I've told you the story, and he's kind of on the outs in a lot of our theological circles, but early in my faith, it was actually a really, really valuable sermon. Not actually a great sermon, but good advice. From on a sermon that I heard about Proverbs 31, and the pastor in question was a kind of a loudmouth member
Driscoll.
of the. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
I didn't want to
it's
drop
okay. We
name
can
drop,
say,
but
yeah, even a broken
okay,
clock can be right twice a day.
yeah, exactly. Well, and it was really good advice, which was um, it was valuable for me, which was if I want to have a wife that has certain characteristics, if I want a Proverbs 31 wife, I need to grow to level up so that that kind of woman would want to be with me rather than want to run in the opposite direction, which is where I was in university. And like that means, okay, so figure out what my vocation is, develop some responsibility, develop relationships, and develop who I am and what I want, what God has for me, right? Like what talents God has given me. Um, and so when I did meet my wife, um, her reaction to me was the opposite of the reaction of all the other men that were interested in her, which was for her to think this man is so respectful and he's so confident, and I want like this is somebody I want to be with. So like it's yeah, to level up is a faster way of saying to become worthy of a Proverbs 31 woman. But
Yeah, and I
anyway,
had the same experience with my wife as
yeah,
well. She's noted that as well, and
yeah,
now she's also noted like you must have been a very interesting person in college to know, and you guys have to kind of get together and, over a Zoom call or something, and
yes,
you can fill her in. So,
yeah,
but this is a good segue for this video. I want to play Homath's. I don't know why he named himself after like farming,
yeah.
gardening
He re-
instruments, but
he really enjoys farming.
yes, but he's got some interesting videos, and again, I'll say like his background and his perspective is coming from he did a I guess a postgraduate degree in psychology, which
Yeah,
personally I'm not the biggest fan of that worldview, but he's actually come to, some really interesting and I think a lot of helpful conclusions. Not perfect, but a lot of helpful. And
yeah.
here's one I came across, and you introduced me to this channel just recently. I want to play this for everyone so that we can comment on this.
But heroes are scary. They scare bad guys. That's where our disgusting language comes from. Nice is weak, strong is bad. You can't be both, just one or the other. So, violence in the heart does not mean violence in the street. It means you can do bad things, but you won't. Jordan Peterson explained this once with another Bible quote: "The meek shall inherit the earth." What he explained was that the word meek was translated poorly. It doesn't mean wimp, it means men. But they don't use their power for evil, they use it to create safety. Meek doesn't mean no sword, it means uses the sword for good. It means hero. That makes a little more sense, doesn't it? The heroes shall inherit the earth. Oh, the Bible makes sense if you know what it says. Here, let me open up Proverbs. Be not envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them, for their hearts devise violence, and their lips talk of trouble. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. A wise man is full of strength, and a man of knowledge enhances his might. It's all in here. It's a user manual for being human. And that's why saying bad boys and good guys is so stupid. You can't be good if you're not strong. Just a nice wimp or a weak jerk.
Okay, we'll stop there. Any comments on that one, Pete? I don't know if the
Uh,
translation is true about the meek. I haven't looked into that, but
I've heard Jordan Peterson say that, and even if that is not the best translation of meek, because I'd say like, but it definitely the rest of the rest of the passages in Scripture don't like. And I come from a Mennonite background, which is tends to view the peace passages as all encompassing, um, but ba- there's just as many war passages, and they're all geared towards just like riches. Violence or strength is viewed as wealth in Scripture. It's a tool God blesses some with, and it is meant to be used appropriately in a godly way, right? So you have Abraham, who by all accounts was a super wealthy man, and then you have the righteous rich and the righteous poor, and the unrighteous rich and the unrighteous poor, and we tend to divide it in terms of poor and rich versus righteous and unrighteous. To use an economic equivalent, um, you could say there's the productive rich and the productive poor, and the unproductive rich and the unproductive poor. And it's not a matter of poor or rich, but a matter of productivity or unproductivity. And the same thing is here. Is like there's um, there's an importance to strength, and I think, and I really struggle with this because my desires are often to be kind and nice, and I need to be strong, and that means, yeah, being able to defend. Because I'm trying to remember where I heard it from, but the idea of, if we can remain strong in every context, our wives can trust us. Uh, when if we can be strong and confident in their many circumstances, they can trust us to be wise and strong and confident when facing the world. I feel like that clip was really neat, but we didn't have an intro or an outro, so I wasn't sure what the aim was, other than to say that our wives really do need that. But in terms of talking about dating, um, yeah, how how can anyone how can anyone look at the guys that are around? See, I'm a high school teacher, while I homeschool my kids, which is kind of as I've said, it's a funny contradiction. But I look at the kids that I see in schools, and I go, there's a lot of thugs, and they're very capable of violence, and there's a lot of wimps, and neither of them are safe places. Um, which is the negative part of the dilemma, right? That he had with either you're a jerk or you're nice, and
Well, and he
right,
gets in that. He basically makes into the
yeah,
quadrant. I don't know if I can bring it back. He's got very nice
yeah,
visuals, by the way. If you ever watch,
yeah,
I don't know if he's ever going to watch this, but if you look at this quadrant here, right? He's getting into, like, women's reactions, and what it is
yeah,
basically is, the nice guys end up in the who, it's like,
yeah,
or ick, right? It's like, as you said, like, it's not a safe place for women to be with a nice guy who,
hmm,
this is why he calls it being sword pilled, right? Where
yeah,
guys think that women want, because they communicate, well, we want nice guys, but what they actually first of all want, in the same way that guys want a wife who's not going to be abrasive and kind of, you know uh you know bombastic, and this is where, like, the girl boss, like, gives us the ick,
hmm,
right? For women, it's the opposite, where they're looking for a guy who's going to express strength, and a nice guy by definition isn't, right? So they'll go to the jerk first, because at least there's some strength there, but it's strength that is going to end up hurting her, right? What they're really looking for at the end of the day is a guy who, as Vodi Balkan says, and again, I have to have my Vodi quote for today, it's strength under power, or strength under control. Sorry.
hmm,
And
yeah,
that was the whole idea of, like, you don't want to be the lion, right? Just kind of, you know,
yeah,
deleting, his lioness, right? That's the jerk, right?
hmm,
But you do want to be a guy who, yes, is going to be loving and tender and compassionate, to not just his wife, but to his whole family, and a woman needs to
hmm,
know that. And then at the same time, though, and again, maybe down here in Texas, I'll put it this way: we got Second Amendment protections for a reason. If someone comes stooping around the backyard at 2 a.m, right?
hmm,
And the expectation is we're going out there, and we're willing to go out there, and we know what we're doing. We know what end of what business end what the business end of the gun is, and which way to point it, right?
yeah,
So that's kind of the thesis on this video. I do recommend it. It's actually generally a good video. For anyone who's looking, any guys who are struggling with this difference between, why women are going for the bad boy versus, them when they're just, like, trying to be so nice and everything, right? You're just a good friend is what that's going to get you. But going back to scripture as well, Pete, kind of what you were saying. It's not even a single verse. It's a phrase that continually appears in the Bible. If you want to know, if you're a Christian, right, this is a commandment for you. If you're a guy, if you're not a Christian, right, this is at least, I'll say, the model of what a righteous man should look like. And the phrase, I'll just put it in here, because I know it'll come up, is be strong and courageous, right? And if you look here,
hmm,
this site I know is going to bring it up here. Look at all the verses. This starts in Joshua. Joshua, be strong and courageous, right? They're entering into the land of what is now Israel, right? Be strong and courageous. Deuteronomy 31, at the end of Moses' life before they enter the promised land, right? Other stuff is appearing here that's related, but that phrase, if you do a Bible search on that, it's continually appearing there. And this is one of the things I think that a lot of modern Christianity gets so wrong. You brought up the Mennonites. I don't think that they're alone by any means in this. A lot of
hmm,
even jellyfish, churches are like this. The pastor gets up there in his skinny jeans and he's like, we just, as Christians, we just need to be, really nice to our neighbor, and, show them the love of Jesus. And it's like, look, love is not a feeling. It's not a Hallmark card, right? And
yeah,
we've sold this whole thing And so, it's funny as going back to what you were just saying a moment ago. It's like even amongst pastors, we have the quadrant that video, the sword pill video has had. You have the jerk, like Mark Driscoll, right?
Yeah.
And guys will go like, "Hey, he's a jerk," right? It's like he's not
Hmm.
just a wimp, right? But you have a lot of nice guy wimps, right? Or at least they act like that on the stage. And what you're really looking for is a fellow who is going to be sensitive and again tender to his flock when he needs to be, but he also is going to be strong. And I think it's a John Calvin quote that he needs to have a voice for the sheep and a voice for the wolves.
Yeah.
Now, one other things because you brought that up as well, Pete. You brought up kind versus and nice, and I want to ask you: is there a difference between those two words? Is like because the Bible, for example, says to be kind; it never says to be nice. So how would we define those?
I would say that I'd probably reflect on it personally and say, I, I'm being kind when I'm trying to do good for someone, even though it's hard, even though I don't want to. Um, again, it's easy to do things for someone for which there's a reciprocal relationship. That's uh, you know, transactional. You're going to get something. I mean, I'll give you an example. We were over to a friend's house for lunch, and it was very nice. It's very easy to be generous in that context because there's generosity that will go both ways, right? Um, so I would never put that in the category of nice. It's good to do that. You should don't don't not be generous to people who will also be generous to you. Um, but that isn't exactly kindness. Kindness is doing good for people who won't be able to do that to you when it's hard to do that. To be sweet when you don't want to be, when it's incredibly difficult to be forgiving when you feel as if you are right in feeling wronged by the action. Niceness is pretending to do so in order to avoid conflict.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean, we're both, originally from Canada.
Hmm.
Niceness is a plague on the country of Canada. If you want to know, like, a large part of the reason why Canada's in a lot of trouble these days, yes, communism, but a lot of it has to do with this niceness culture. And I'll give an example of how niceness plays out. Even here in the states, niceness is what you get from your entire workforce, give or take a few,
Yeah,
who value their careers enough to go along with even whatever nonsense is going on in the office,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
They won't actually, sometimes they should speak up and they don't, right? But
yeah,
often niceness is when you have the really bad boss and the whole team knows it, but no one can say anything, so they just are nice about it, right? uh
yeah,
I almost wanted to say that, and so I guess I will say I have a feeling if we brought the ladies back on, and asked them the definition of niceness, they'd know pretty quickly, right? What the difference is between
yeah,
kindness and niceness, because women amongst each other deal with that all the time, right?
yeah. And in a way that usually as men we don't necessarily even see. And I'd say like on the surface, it actually, at least I think for men and for me, you might mistake the one for the other pretty easily. But the motivations are fundamentally different. Um, and yeah, the ability to truth, like, and that doesn't mean like, I think we can easily and casually use like, I've had a circumstance recently in a church where um people were saying we're being loving, and the loving thing to do in this situation is be truthful, or to engage in discipline. And I went, "Y- yeah." But also, um it's also not just that though. It's like, so you could say, well, I'm being kind by by being truthful, but um it also should be more than just discipline. Do you know what I mean? Or just more than just truth. I think of I'm trying now. I want to say because I don't want to misquote illustrious people, but uh, I'm trying to remember who said that, that you should warn people and preach hell, but with tears in your eyes.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who that is as well. But like, yeah, that and that's the idea. And I think what you're getting at while you're looking up that quote and who said it is people automatically we're driven today to believe that justice and love are in conflict with each other, and they can't be, right? I mean, as Christians, we know this because God, is both, the
But
embodiment of
yeah, that
justice and the embodiment of love,
yeah,
right?
that's right.
But also, let's put it this way, the police officer who is pulling over a drunk driver on the road, right,
Yeah,
is applying justice, right? But he's also loving his
yeah,
city that he's serving as well. And no one would argue
that's
that
right.
because it's a drunk driver. It's the same thing as that German party that led to World War
Yeah,
II, right? We
yeah,
never disputed that. And what we're doing though, is that we're conflating our own self-image and that of all these different groups that have emerged, whether
hmm
it's politically, socially, religiously, whatever, right, over the last few generations. And we're like, well,
yeah,
that can't be loving and just at the same time too. And you're right, like, then you have the mistake where people will come and say we must be just, that is love. But it's not,
yeah,
as you said, it's not that case. If you're, there is such a thing as wrathful, it's
yeah,
not really justice, but it's wrath, right?
yeah.
Unrighteous wrath. But anyway, you were gonna say who that was.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, it was Dwight. It was D.L. Moody who said that.
Yeah,
But I was like, yeah, because so if we're like, it's it has to be love, but that's going to like, I like it would be it would be very different, for instance, if that to use that police officer example, like I keep on, if yeah, like he should that young person lose their license? Absolutely. um would it would it be really wise for the police officer to beat that person in order to teach them a lesson, or to um you know berate them constantly and make sure their life remains a living hell? No, but that's because that this person has received punishment, and this person has, as a result of the justice that's been done, their things are safer. But the attitude, I think, is a big part of it, right?
yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
but
and we
that's
actually
a
had a yeah, we had actually a case here in Houston. Supreme Court actually just ruled on it here in the
yeah.
states. Police officer ended up shooting a guy dead in his car for a traffic stop that had to do with like a headlight being out. That's where it
Oh,
started. And yeah, and so that's
yeah,
a great illustration. That's unjust,
yeah,
use of force, right? And everyone sees that
yeah,
as like, it's like, how did they even get to this? And of course, then he wanted qualified immunity, aka I'm not, I'm above the law. It never was passed into law in the states. It was something the court made up in the '60s. But they
yeah,
lost the case. So this guy, rightfully, now he's going to receive justice for his
yeah,
injustice, right? And
yeah.
that's the loving thing to do, right, for the family,
That's
and
right.
for society. So yeah, no, for
Yeah,
sure. Um, so let me ask you, since we're talking about justice, it's a
sure.
great segue for this. Shifting gears a little bit. One of the other challenges, and I kind of hinted at it earlier with young men, and I can sympathize with this, is they will look, and I see tons of comments like this. I'm never getting married. If marriage is a contract legally, which it is, in our
Yeah,
systems, uh, you'd be a fool to basically enter a contract where the other party has more incentive to basically break the contract. And by that, what I'm referring to is the concept not just of no fault divorce, basically divorce for any reason, but also
yeah,
that the family courts are, I had a short video on the channel back in the spring on this. The courts are designed by law in places like Texas to incentivize breaking up the family, usually getting the dad to pay crippling child support that doesn't even necessarily go to the child, or it
yeah,
doesn't support the child. And so I guess my question with all that preamble, Pete, is, you know are we at the point where we need to start seriously advocating for getting rid of no fault divorce and reforming the family court
Uh,
system?
yes.
Okay, good. Glad
That's
we got that covered.
yeah. I don't know yes. I I think I think no fault divorce is um a travesty, and but I also think like uh, it's can I this is a weird element to this. Like I think it's really sad. I think it's terrible, but I also see a bit of a reversal of idiocracy. Now you never watch a secular movie like that, Matthew. So I'm not sure if you've seen it, but
I haven't seen that one, but my wife did finally get me started on White Chicks tonight, and we got to finish it later this
okay.
week. So if that, I don't know if that's
So
close.
no, Idiocracy is sci-fi comedy that Mike Judge wrote, and it's again very offensive and not at all appropriate for any good person to watch. But I've watched it, but I've repented anyway. The premise is that um, Luke Wilson is an average person with an average IQ, and he gets frozen and sent, like, woken up accidentally 500 years in the future. But the premise, that's like the plot. The premise is smart people are not having children, and dumb people are having lots of children. And so in Idiocracy, the future is terrible because essentially all the smart people have waited till they were um, too old to have children, and now they can't have children, and all the dumb people have not used protection and have lots of children. Um, and despite the evil of our world, what I feel is like lo- it's the people who are thinking very short term. Now this isn't good for them, and I think they're going to regret this. But the people who are thinking short term will go, okay, so it's a legal system that's screwed, that'd be screwed for, so I shouldn't bother. And as a result, the people who think of marriage purely as a legal contract are not going to be the ones getting married and having children. Uh, and culturally and demographically and economically, that is disastrous. But a couple generations from now, I don't know I don't know what that will look like. So flippantly, I can say, but I don't know how we can get people in our culture to think of marriage as a covenant. Um, that language has kind of disappeared from from our lexicon, from our our zeitgeist, from how we think. Um, Other than the idea of like, well, if there's a contract and you break a contract, you're legally like you can sue the other person. So there's you can figure out fault in some sense. You've got to find fault. You can't just go, well, no, there's no fault at all. Um,
Yeah,
but again,
yeah, yeah.
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that. So I think we're seeing the fruits of the sexual revolution and kind of the no fault divorce in this. This is the fruit of that, and it's going to lead to no children, fewer and fewer children, and then um, a great demographic collapse. And um, those who are uh, I'm trying to remember what the term that I've heard used, pronatalist, um, are going to be the ones who populate the earth, the people who have children who they love and who they raise to want to have a covenantal marriage.
Yeah, as my pastor put it, is that the one-eyed man is king in the land of the blind.
Yeah,
Like, and like if you want to talk about inheriting the earth, that'll do it for sure. And we see that demographically in some countries.
yeah,
If you look at just demographically where the UK is, right? And I heard James White say the other day. I know it's not related to this topic specifically, but they're not going to have to stop Iran from having nukes, to go after like Israel. And, I know I've waded into that whole thing and we'll have a
yeah,
future episode on that soon. But, eventually the UK, which already has nukes, right, is going to be controlled by the same ideology that Iran is controlled by. So,
Yeah,
you know, it's
except
yeah,
except and this is another resource that, again, like it's drawing from people who have very different worldviews but are kind of coming to the same kind of conclusion. There's another podcast I would highly recommend, called Based Camp, um, with Malcolm and Simone Collins, and they're neonatalists or pronatalists, um, and he Based Camp, like there they are, Based Camp, and basically they uh, Malcolm Collins was a he was like, I think he was working for a finance company or something like that in South Korea, and he said this was years ago. He said he was doing projections on the South Korean economy, and everyone was he's like, there's something really wrong here, because all our projections are on an increasing population, and there's no increasing population, and we're all like, this whole system is going to collapse soon. And the response from everyone was like, yeah, we all kind of know that, we're just not looking at it right now. And then he started looking at lots of other things. Now he's got a lot of crazy heretical kind of views that he's trying to create his own religion. But in terms of uh, broad demographic takes, it's super interesting, because they have seen, um, that as Muslim nations become modern, as Muslim immigrants come to Western countries, they tend to just adopt not just what they refer to as the urban monoculture, like our kind of liberal, um, we can have lots of diversity, provided it's only how much melanin you have in your skin and what kind of food you eat. Um, that the kind of culture of we all have to be the same in our like our deep philosophical underpinnings, so we can have lots of surface differences. Um, but as Muslims move to Western countries, their demographics drop as well, significantly. And so it would be like England would be Muslim for a generation, and then it would not be anything, or it would
yeah,
be Baptist,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah. There you go. Yeah,
or
uh,
or or Mormon. I don't know, but
yeah. No, no. That's fair. I mean, well, no, and the Mormons are. I mean, I think you're going to see that drop. Pretty rapidly
yeah.
too.
and,
But
and they've pointed
yeah,
out to that, yeah, that the Mormons have dropped a lot, and that the groups that tend to do well are, groups that, funny enough, um, find a way to either exist on the fringes of the monoculture, or take kind of a hostile saboteur response. So like Jews, Anabaptists, like that they're the ones who are,
troublemakers, right?
yes, troublemakers who will use some technology, but don't want to fit in with everyone else that see themselves as slightly different. Um, and he's had Homath on, as well as he's had another guy that I've started to enjoy the content of, Base Zoomer, not Base Zoomer, sorry, Redeem Zoomer.
Yeah, I think I've come across this channel before.
Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, no, this is all really good and interesting, and so and let's just say this too, though. Yeah, I have come across this channel before. So so actually, I think this is actually an excellent video. Again, I'm going to save this for
yeah,
a future segment. But anyway, I was just quoting it today at church. But let let's say this though too, is that like, should there be a fight legally to reclaim our legal system and make it like, because as they say here in the States, family court isn't a court of law, right? And that's what people usually think of things. I'm going to a court of law. It's a court of equity, right? And I don't know exactly what Canada is,
yeah,
but there's a huge difference in how the court views things. But let's go with this. Let's say the state of Texas, for example, right? Sees the light and abolishes no fault divorce, and actually says there, unless like, you have to establish who's at fault for the divorce, and there's going to be a penalty even when it comes to, like, say, let's say custody of the kids, or uh, you know um, payments, things like that. Basically, put it, undo what you were saying earlier, where the sexual revolution basically, you know, disincentivized men from even wanting to get into the system, right? And you're
Yeah.
right; it's a covenant, not a contract. Although people don't understand what that word means, but just on the contractual level, right? You can have two people that enter into a covenant marriage in a church, and this will kind of bring us to the last topic for today. And then one of them decides, well, I don't want to be married to this person anymore, right? And they'll have all kinds of excuses on why they don't want to do that. It's not the church they're going to, right, for the final say of
Yeah.
whether the marriage gets to survive or not. You're still going through the courts. The courts will be able to legally, divide that marriage. And so all that to say is that there's a lot of, like, it's not just the legal system you have to change, it's the culture as well, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not going back to, saying we go back all the way to the, it's a shame, you're shameful if you've ever been divorced at all. Those cultures did
Yeah.
exist at time in the past, but there needs to be an understanding that every divorce is an event that is regretful, right? It's
Yeah.
something that we'd rather not have happen, and there is at least one party at fault for that, right?
Yeah.
At least on a moral level, if not on a legal
It
level.
could be both.
It
Yeah,
could be
it
both.
could
And
be
that's why I
both,
said at
but
least one,
it'll
right?
at
Yeah.
very least one.
Yeah, and we need, and that needs to be the starting point. And then you also look at it too, like, I don't care what anyone says, right? They're never doing what's best for the kids. The kids are not even a factor in these
Yeah.
discussions, right? So, but that's a lot of work. I think it's worthwhile, but it's not going to be a quick or easy victory. And instead, I'm seeing a lot of men, just to kind of contrast this, men are going down the road of saying, well, there needs to be mandatory paternity tests upon birth, right? And I mean, I'm expecting number two here in a few weeks. I
Yeah.
don't want anyone poking any needles in my little one, right? Just, I mean, we know it's
Yeah.
mine, right?
Yeah.
But that's not the solution, right? Is to have paternity tests automatically for everything. The solution again is more cultural, right? You're actually
Yeah.
confronting the bad behavior. So on that note, last thing here, because we have to wrap up, and I got my producer, who also happens to be my wife,
Yeah.
giving me the 10-minute notice 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the role that pastors play in destroying marriages, because unfortunately this is a
Okay.
thing. And
Yeah.
I have two clips here from a recent
Okay.
video from Conversations That Matter, another excellent channel, more on the Christian side, but if
Yeah.
again, great stuff. And I've brought up David Edgington. He's got a new book, White Knights
Hmm.
and Reviling Wives, coming out soon. So I'm going to just play these two clips that I.
And the husband has a reviling wife, he goes to the right resource to get help because he can't address the problem. He goes to his church, he goes to his pastor, or he even goes to a biblical counselor and he says, please help us. And the counselor, and again, including biblical, so-called biblical counselors and pastors, they blame the guy. And they say, if you only loved your wife more, just do what she says, sacrifice more for her, and then she'll be loving towards you. And this is a terrible, terrible way to counsel a family. It's bias. It's partiality. James chapter 2 warns us about being partial. This part normally shocks people. This is in Reformed churches, this is in Arminian churches, this is in Reformed Baptist or Presbyterian churches. This is in Arminian churches of every stripe, Bible churches, Calvary Chapel, doesn't matter. It's all of them. I see the same thing over and over and over again. And I talk to these pastors too, and I say, do you understand what's going on here? And they refuse to see it.
Yeah, so I guess Pete, I'll give you the last word on this last question for today, and thanks
Mm.
again for joining. Based on what David Edgington is saying here too, it's going to be tall order to reform our legal system to where it needs to be for men,
Hmm.
and I want to do that for non-Christian men. As I've
Yeah.
said through this whole series, marriage is a good thing. You don't have to be Christian, right? You don't have to be religious to
Yeah.
enjoy marriage, and I want that because our grandparents had that example.
Yeah.
But one place that it should be starting is in the church, right? Not just because
Yes.
I think it's a great opportunity to witness the power of
Hmm.
God working in his people, but also because it's, like, depending on your denomination, it's a very local thing to have happen. Like this
Hmm.
kind of thing that Edgington's talking about, is really easy. Like, it's a small scale thing as far as an impact, but it could have a huge, large scale
Yeah.
impact in terms of the reform. So, what are your thoughts on that? Where does the church start on reforming its view of marriage in when things go rocky in a relationship?
Um, it's hard because I the like there's a real criticism that's legitimate in what he's saying, but I also don't want to I don't want to not address it. The truth in the criticism that he's critiquing, which is there is a point to which I think a reasonable and godly person should first approach the issue in a repentant heart. To say, so if there's communication in your marriage or in a marriage or in a relationship, it's easy to go like, they're the bad one. And I am justified because that's what the Bible says, right? Is that my heart is always right. That's what it always says. That's what it says. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. uh no, but we're all sinners, and we should like a, a repentant godly person should take time to go, what could I have done? And I've like, for instance, I've found this, and I think I've started finally learning it after 15 years of marriage, but most of the time when my wife Rebecca, um when she is upset with me about something, um she has a very particular thing that's viewed as a grievance, but really that grievance is a stand-in for something much broader that she feels like, um, you didn't do this, and I've asked you to, uh, and I'm really upset about that. I'm like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I'll do that thing. But really, the issue is that is um, a symbol or a stand-in for a broader issue. Like, I feel like you're not listening to me and you don't care what I think. And so there is value, and I don't want to jump on the on a kind of a Christian MGTOW attitude of like, well, you know really the issue is our wives. So I don't want to go
Absolutely, I
there,
agree with you
right?
there. Like that, yeah,
So s-
yeah.
so we should always do that. That said, there is an allowance if that's the only approach that happens. Like, any I think any good, and I think you've suffered in this situation, um really badly in your own story, Matt. I think at some point you've got to share with the audience, such as it is your circumstances. But I I have never seen that, and that's one of the reasons why I through those years I walked with you, because I was like, yeah, should you? Yes. Does that mean that, like, but there's got to be the other hand of that, right? So, should you try and find a way to communicate with your wife? Yes. Should you try and examine your own actions and what was said and what was done, and could this have been done better? Could you have been gentler? All of those are true. And at the same time, like, there's the other portion of Ephesians, right? Like, yes, you are called to love your wives uh and love your wife like Christ loves the church, which means self-sacrifice and all those things. But the other portion of that is not dismissed, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
The
yeah,
sorry, go on.
and so what you're saying, I agree. And by the way, my story, we'll have to have that, at some point.
Yeah,
Maybe get a few more subscriptions, which is a great
yeah,
segue to say subscribe today, and put on your alerts. But you know, I agree with you. Like, in that, if you're an individual, right, and you're in the church and you're in the situation, or someone who is, and you can help them, like you helped me, Pete. You start first internally, right? And I would recommend that for both sides of the couple, right? Is that you start examining, because human depravity means human depravity. It is, again, Romans 3, right? There's none righteous, no, not one, right? That doesn't mean accept the wives or accept the husbands, which at different points in history, different generations, the church has slid to either one of those ditches, right? So, I guess, for the pastors though, or the Christian, the biblical counselors that David Edgington is addressing here, because
Yeah.
he's working with couples. He's actually talking to these pastors and counselors, and he says it's across all denominations. They
Yeah.
do not. They're not. They're actually inserting themselves into the marriages. They're not always, but
Hmm.
they're generally favoring the wives, right? Because they're looking on the outside, not on the heart. And I guess, what advice do you have if you're offering advice to a pastor or to a local counselor on how we need to reform the church as far as how we handle, marriage crisis discussions? Yes, we get them. Yeah,
The
go ahead.
well, I would say women are sinners too, uh, right? And
Really?
yes,
Sorry.
well, yeah, but yeah, like, and I know that sounds like a silly, like, I no, this is the first time I've had a conversation online, and I don't know how many subscribers we had, but I think uh, theologically I'm a Reformed Baptist, even though background I'm a Mennonite, and I don't know what church I'm going to right now because we're in a transition there. But um, you know, I do believe that humanity is depraved, and that means not just like the XY chromosome, and sin reveals itself and looks different with genders and cultures and age brackets and demographics and all of those things differently. But sin is part of all of our makeup, even as we're made holy in Christ. And so that's the portion is and I would also say that's the portion that ties back into what we were talking about initially, which was the idea of niceness, right? Like, um I think sometimes pastors are trying to do it because it seems nicer to side with the wife rather than the husband. Um, I think sometimes pastors are might might do it because it's going to be less conflict. Um, but it's important to remember that, like, to start from the initial premise, a very theological one, which is that we're all sinners, and so everyone will have at the end of any discussion and counseling something to repent of, and it's going to be something that's not just a, like, I'm sorry, I should have brought this up earlier, but an actual sin, and it's an actual area um of idolatry, where something else has kind of taken God's place, whether it's our comfort or a desire for peace, or expectations, or wanting to be like, all, there's going to be sin that is revealed in those situations, and you have to kind of start with the understanding that like, one person might have done a worse thing, but there's sin involved, and if we're not willing to accept that both people could be sinners, like, I think essentially it comes down to um a cultural problem, and that cultural problem is in the church. People don't know scripture and don't
Yeah.
really, really believe scripture.
And if I can kind of summarize what you
Yeah.
just said in a very
Yeah.
concise, bow.
Much more concise than me. Yeah.
Well, no, this is good. We need the detail, but here's the
Yeah.
bottom line. Where Homath and a lot of these other channels that are actually trying and generally doing some good stuff, where they're falling short, and where the church is falling short by what you're just saying, is that we don't have a proper anthropology,
Yeah.
right? That people are not basically good. And you can
Yeah.
divide that into different ethnicities, you can divide that into men and women. As soon as you start kind of carving out people out of that humanity is bad, group,
Yeah.
you run into problems. And this is also fruit of what we have today is fruit of doing those carve outs.